Hello, everybody. You are listening to the Sleepover podcast. I'm Carolyn Lovewell, and I'm here today with my friend Rachel Capurso of Aeolian Heart Astrology. She also does the Stargazer podcast and the Rage of Aquarius podcast. And I've just enjoyed Rachel's work so much for years. She writes these gorgeous essays that, if you're on her email list, you can receive with just deep rich insight into the astrological transits and what's happening. And I find, there's a good amount of technically proficient astrologers out there today. But I feel like astrology is really an art that demands a whole lot of heart and soul, because it's one thing to be able to look at the aspects and look at the history and how they apply, and it's another thing to see deeper into the movements and patterns of the culture. And I just feel like Rachel super excels at that. So I'm so delighted to have her on today. And I'm looking forward to hearing her thoughts about what's going on in our world. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I'm super, super grateful to be here.
Yay. So, yeah, well, I was, I let you know I was really curious about your thoughts about what the astrology says concerning the upcoming U.S. election and about 2025 in general. So I figure you could just kick us off. But also, I'm just curious your general perception. So literally anything you want to talk about having to do with astrology and world events, I am extremely delighted to hear.
All right. Well, the upcoming astrology for the U.S. election is very ugly, guys. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I am always very careful about the way I deliver information regarding what I see with astrological cycles, and that is because I think that we have enough doom and gloom and fear mongering in this world that is being used to manipulate us and keep us in a very vulnerable state of mind so that we can be pushed and pulled by exploitative and manipulative powers. So I feel like astrology should never be used like that or abused in that way, though it has a long history of being used that way, and I'm happy to talk about that too. However, the fact of the matter is that when I first looked at this upcoming election season, I was really blown away because the astrology is so tense, and it's something that actually really, really begins in September. It's really triggered on November 3rd, which is what, 2 days? November 3rd and November 4th, there's a major trigger point. And then November 5th is the actual US election. And then from there on out until next February, it looks to me like all out war. And I don't mean like we're going to get on the battlefield. I just mean that, as far as I can see, it is not going to be something that is settled on election day. And I know that in the US, we've been through that before, not just in 2020, but it's happened before that elections haven't been settled on.
Right, the famous hanging chads, the Gore versus Bush, was it? Yeah.
Exactly, 100%. So this is going to be a time where we're not going to get any satisfaction in terms of just, oh, that's over. At the very least, we're not going to have anything be over on November 5th. So let me just give you guys some details about what's going on. Because astrology isn't so much about what's happening on the day. It's a study of cycles, and the very first cycle that anyone can follow is the moon. That is absolutely accessible and easy for anyone to grasp. And actually, the moon cycle is the most instructive because every planetary cycle works exactly the same way, just in larger cycles of time. So we're looking at the essential circle of the moon, which is new when the sun and moon conjoin, and then develops into the waxing square, and then the full moon, which is actually the opposition, the waning square, and then again another new moon. That is a single lunar cycle. Every planetary cycle works exactly that same way. So if you can grasp the moon cycle, anything that astrologers talk about is the same. They're just expanding the amount of time or the window of time. So there's a lot more going on than moon cycles. And one of the things that is so important about the United States right now, in case your listeners are not familiar, is that the US has been going through something called the Pluto return since 2008. And it's a very interesting cycle of time for any country because, like individual people, any individual nation also has a natal chart.
I didn't know that it started in 2008. Does the Declaration of Independence have Pluto in Capricorn or?
Yes, exactly. Very good. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But the Constitution has Pluto in Aquarius. Is that right?
Exactly. 100%.
Okay.
So actually, the nation's birth chart is 1776 with Pluto in Capricorn. And then the war is fought for many years. And by the time the war is won, and you're right, by the time the Constitution is ratified and the Bill of Rights are, accepted and George Washington becomes president, all of those things happen with Pluto in Aquarius. So we actually see the real meaning of, or I guess the archetypal significance of that transition from the world of Pluto in Capricorn to the world of Pluto and Aquarius within that war. And what I will say is that we can learn so much about what Pluto and Capricorn represents by looking at that war. So it takes 250 years approximately for Pluto to actually make one full cycle through the zodiac. And so ever since that moment, July 4th, 1776, we have been waiting for Pluto to return to the sign of Capricorn. And the actual exact conjunction of Pluto on top of the US natal Pluto, that actually occurred in February of 21 and in 2022.
Mm.
So let's just talk about what was going on when the Declaration of Independence was signed. There are a lot of cycles going on, but we're just going to pick on this one theme, as you do when you're examining literature. There's a large story, there's a lot of things going on, but let's just pick out one theme because you can learn a lot. So when when the Declaration of Independence was signed, the empire of Great Britain was vast and it was powerful. The American colonies were just one branch of this vast empire that had been conquered by sea. And yet, because the British military had been occupying the colonists since, I believe it was 1772, maybe 74, I can't remember now, I'm very sorry about that. But I was looking at past Mars-Uranus conjunctions recently, and I saw that it was literally the week of a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, which we also just had, when the British military came and occupied the colonists, and they were under martial law. They were being oppressed, they were being murdered, they were being falsely accused, robbed, raped, and pillaged, no doubt. And it was really, really hard. And the hardship on them was such that they wanted to try anything but war, and they did try many other things before war, including one of the most successful boycotts of all time. The colonists got together and boycotted British imports, which was not just a virtue signal. These people took on huge economic hardship. They sacrificed tremendous potential for their own vending. They had to stop selling these very valuable products. Therefore, they were missing out on huge profits. Not only that, but to miss out on like tobacco and coffee and tea just sucks. Like the quality of life goes down. So they sacrificed huge amounts of profit and also pleasure to show the British government that they were not willing to put up with this abuse. And in fact, they had some success with that. And they had one of the economic sanctions that had been put on them removed. But the oppression didn't stop. And so by the time we have the Declaration of Independence, it's been under so much duress for so many decades. And it's finally time to say no. And what they were saying no to was this archetype of Pluto in Capricorn, which represents the shadow of imperialism. It's the heavy hand of power that has been corrupted by too much power, by absolute power. It's the spirit of tyranny itself. And what's interesting about it is that the founding fathers were all very esoteric and they knew their astrology. We may be the only nation that is alive today that had their natal chart elected, like
Hmm.
magically speaking, you know.
That makes sense with how hermetic Washington, D.C. is, all the far out
It's a beautiful
symbolism.
thing. Benjamin
Mhm.
Franklin actually elected the natal chart. So elected the day that they would actually sign this declaration for the purpose of inaugurating a new idea, the birth of something truly innovative, truly new, truly amazing that had never been done before. An Aquarian ideal, an experiment, something really, really groundbreaking. And when you look at the natal chart for the United States, it's so beautiful. I mean, it says everything that we want to believe about this country. It has a moon in Aquarius, meaning the heart of the nation is progressive, forward thinking, always in tune with divine inspiration, genius, and the ability to actually see humanity as a whole, all people as being equal. The words of the Declaration are, in fact, like an ode to Aquarius. And there's also so much prosperity in the chart. It really shows a rich country that's going to be so beautiful. However, what they did not know about was Pluto. They were completely unaware that this planet existed and wasn't actually discovered until 1930. And it was discovered in our country, by the way, which is significant. But nevertheless, Pluto doesn't exist in their world. It doesn't actually have any place in the original natal chart.
Hmm.
So, what that tells us is that Pluto in Capricorn is there anyway, whether they know about it or not. And it represents, therefore, the most repressed and unconscious aspect
Hmm.
of this country's origin.
You know what is blowing my mind about that, Rachel? Can I insert a little something?
Yeah.
I've just been going down this state national rabbit hole, which is all about changing one's citizenship status. Yeah, I mentioned it to you.
Yeah.
And the books and the websites connected to that are telling me stuff that I had never heard about that I'm still trying to completely verify, which is basically that the United States very quickly actually got into debt.
Mm.
Um, I guess in debt to France, and France was actually being controlled by England at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that through this debt and through like secret deals that were made like shortly after the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
um, the USA was effectively still under, British vassalship, British bank control, like the whole British banking connection with like the Rothschilds banking empire and everything,
Yeah.
and essentially started to move away from the constitutional freedoms and into what we have today, which is, I guess, the U.S. courts are dominated by something called the Uniform Commercial Code,
Mm-hmm.
which is, basically ruled by bank. And anyways, it was just so crazy that you spell that out about how the Pluto in Capricorn was unconscious and therefore occluded, because it seems to me like this rule by the banks, this like secret debt that was,
Mm-hmm.
I never read about this in my high school social studies text.
Yeah.
That after we won our freedom, we were still heavily indebted and became more and more, which eventually led to the creation of the Federal Reserve and all sorts of nutty town things that have been fucking us ever since.
Yeah.
Um, anyways, I just got so excited when you said that about Pluto and Capricorn, because it was like, oh my gosh, yes, that's what's been unconscious for us, has been all of this. We
Yep.
think we're the land of the free, and really, there's this disgusting web of rule by banks all over us.
That's right. 100%. I thought that you would be a really good person to talk to about this because of your expertise in shadow work, not just for the individual, but trying to read the collective shadow and what has been unconscious. And what's really difficult about this period for the United States is that it is essentially a collective dark night of the soul, a collective confrontation with all that has been hidden and repressed.
Mm,
Now, I want to give Americans credit because one of the things that I really hate about just the zeitgeist and the way that people talk and the way we talk about ourselves is that Americans are stupid and they've believed everything they've been told all along. And this is not true. There's actually always been this amazing precedent in American culture throughout every single generation of questioning authority, having a certain rebellious spirit, having secret meetings by the dock, having underground literature, having citizen journalists doing due diligence. So it's not that it's been completely repressed, but we are all still a part of a collective psyche, a collective culture, and the nation itself cannot grow or develop or mature any faster than it is meant to. And there is this sort of like divine timing to all of this. And so you're right. The banking system, England just found another way to put a lasso on the country. And it's not that it was insignificant that we won that war, it still matters. But you're right. They found another way to just get a hook in and control things from afar because there's a lot
mhm,
more to running an empire like that than just boots on the ground and brute force. There's a
mhm,
lot more to it. So it doesn't mean that there was no purpose in winning that war. There really was. It was a really striking moment in history. However, another way to look at that Pluto placement, which obviously Benjamin Franklin doesn't see it, the founding fathers are sitting there thinking that these ideals are so powerful and it's an idea that's time has come, like Victor Hugo said. So they're just like so ready to make this happen. And they really believed in these things and they were willing to die for these things. And so it's so powerful. And yet they don't know that Pluto's shadow is lingering there in the
mhm.
second house of the US natal chart. And as we develop in the last 250 years, why has there been so much betrayal of these values? Why is it such a highly idealistic Aquarian nation that has been repeatedly guilty of so much hypocrisy and so much oppression, so much inequality? It's really a troubling schism in the psyche of this nation.
Mhm.
And so, why did we have slavery, even though they had these high ideals, for so long? And by the way, there were a lot of abolitionists in that era. There were a lot of abolitionists that signed the Declaration of Independence. That was always a thread. But why did it not become the norm? Why did that not become the majority? Why did that take so long to actually come to fruition? Because of Pluto and Capricorn, which is just repressed, unconscious stuff. And I always thought it's like the way that we grow up and we find ourselves acting like our parents, and it's a
Mhm.
horror. Like we think we're so different. We're doing such different things, and we represent such different values, and we are hanging out with totally different people, and we're living independent lives. We're not like our parents. And then in that one striking moment, you realize, my God, I sound like my mother. I am
Mhm.
doing what my dad did. And you realize that you have been this whole time. It's an unconscious pattern that you've just been acting out and you didn't know it. And in fact,
It's terrifying.
terrifying. So, like, who's our mother? Great Britain, right? Great Britain is our mother. And so we became our mother as we grew. Then the Pluto return occurs. And I'd say that this would be like almost more significant than the Saturn return in an individual's life, because this is when we find out that we are Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that, you know, Tyler Durden is us. Like, it's that moment where we're like, fuck, we have been this schizo nation that really does think of ourselves one way and has acted the opposite, particularly in international war over the last century. And the narrative and the actions became so widely divided that it's caused collective insanity. Naturally, of course. I mean, it would. So Pluto enters Capricorn in 2008, did not actually conjoin Pluto at 26, 27 degrees, where it is in the U.S. natal chart, until 2021, 2022. But still, just that entrance into the sign was the beginning of the Pluto return. And so this whole era, 17 years. By the way, it began January of 2008. Obama enters office. There's the great financial crisis, the economic collapse, the Great Recession. Again, banks. And what was Obama famous for at that time? Instead of uniting people and doing wonderful things, instead he bailed out the banks who had robbed, raped, and pillaged.
Yes, we can bail out the banks.
So again, it's just like, we're not under military occupation, that's true, but it's a different kind of oppression that is just as strong and just as tyrannical. And during 2008 to this moment, we actually watched the global surveillance state, which was in the works for a long time. I'm not saying it all happened overnight, but we really watched it assemble and completely emerge out into
so intense.
Very
intense. Right. If the revelations of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and just like started, I mean, everybody knows now it's like a joke that your phones listen to you. But it's like, it's a super terrifying level of invasion.
Yeah, exactly. And it came out into the light because that's another thing that Pluto does. Pluto opens the portal to the underworld. Pluto is the lens through which you can see the unconscious. Pluto reveals what is unconscious, what is repressed, what is buried, what is hidden. All the dead bodies just start emerging. All of the things that we have tried to deny, they become voiced, they become undeniable. All of the things that we once pretended were not a big deal or far, far away, not our problem, they all of a sudden are our problem. They are no longer deniable, and the truth has been brutal for Americans to face. At the same time, when you see the rest of the natal chart for this nation, we are strong enough. We do have a strong and innovative spirit. We do have a lot of strength and a lot of good. And so it's not a death sentence so long as you're willing to actually just swallow the truth, accept what's going on, realize that we have had a reckoning. And the reckoning has been 100% aligned with the actions of this country. Now, as an individual, I resent it too, because I have not supported most of the things that we deserve punishment for. And yet I'm here, I'm a citizen of the country. And so in that collective, like egregoric sense, the United States has been getting its reckoning, and it is definitely having a very, very, very dark night of the soul. So this starts with Obama, like to the moment, pretty much. Like his inauguration day, Pluto enters Capricorn, Great Recession. The iPhone came out only 6 months before that, by the way. So if you want to talk about getting the global surveillance state just built, fully assembled, and also completely out in the open. Yes, it was planned for a long time, but Pluto in Capricorn is about revealing what's been buried, revealing what's been hidden. And so what Capricorn represents archetypally is mastery over the world, mastery over matter, mastery over earthly power. And so it does represent thrones, institutions of power. It represents great towers and monuments. It represents legacy. But in its darkest and most shadowy sense, it represents the corruption that comes with those high places. It comes with the territory that once there's a certain amount of power, it begins to calcify and become toxic and decadent and cruel. And there's no other way for it to go. History shows us this again and again and again. And it's in fact what the founding fathers really understood deeply, the psychology of tyrants. They understood it so deeply. Their life's work was devoted to dismantling it and protecting against it. And yet we became our mother. So I want to point out that just looking at the election right now, we have to look at what happened last time, because every election since Obama took office has been a Pluto return U.S. election. So in 2020, Joe Biden took office. And it's interesting because he spent more time in the White House than anyone during the Pluto return. So like, let's look at him as like the mascot. As vice president for Obama, he was there for 8 years and then 4 more years recently. And he is like the reincarnation of King George, Mad King George.
Oh my God, that's so brilliant. Yeah, I mean, just this corrupt, self-interested, decrepit old man.
I mean, we don't know what was wrong with King George. It's not actually clear. There's a lot of theories. Some people say it was syphilis. Some people just say he was foolish, demented, mad. But he was famous. He was infamous for being incompetent and crazy, which is also a weakness that was no doubt exploited by the colonists who were ready to rebel because they're being oppressed. And for what? By this weak tyrant. By the way, tyranny is weak because it shows desperation. It's a clawing desperation to maintain a position that is undeserved, completely and totally undeserved. And in order to maintain a level of power that you don't deserve, the only action that's available is to become bludgeoning, brutal, cruel, and you no longer care about subtlety. There's no Machiavellian grace. There's nothing strategic. It's
that's an excellent point because it has become very unsubtle, like the censorship and the it's really intense.
And that's exactly what was going on with the British Empire as well when Pluto was in Capricorn last time. They had their rise, and then they reached this point where they became sick and decrepit. And King George was the symbol of that empire. And that spoke loudly to everyone, not just the Americans, but obviously the great minds of England and the great poets and artists of England also hated this man and spoke out against him, including William Blake, who was bold enough to actually publish something that had a message to King George that was quite rebellious. And it basically said, like, because sedition was a crime that was punishable by death in England at this time. Sedition meaning that you speak out against the king, you question the king. And William Blake actually put in the front of his book a little message to King George that basically said, like, come and get me, I don't really care. So honest to God, like, that was a real temptation of death. And he did it anyway because there was no respect for this man. He was a tyrant and he was also demented. And I couldn't believe, I was trying to understand, like, what's happening? Like, why is this person our symbol? Like, because the president's a symbol, whether you like it or not. And that's just, it's completely objective, everybody. The president is the symbol of the nation. And that's how astrologers look at it. And that's how everyone looks at it, to be honest. But when you're doing the chart of the president, you're actually looking at the fate, fortune, and the reputation of the entire nation for the duration of their reign, whether it's many decades because they're a monarch, or it's just 4 years or 8 years because they're a president. They symbolize the nation. And that really hurts. We can all feel it. It's like a mass spell that you get put under. And yes, we have free will. Yes, we can resist it. Yes, we can say, I do not identify with that. I do not agree with that, but you're still in relationship to it. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you are
Mm-hmm.
symbolized by the president. So Joe Biden was the president during the exact Pluto return. And I saw that. I was like, wow, Pluto, man, like we really just reincarnated the British Empire. And we're even worse. We're even worse. So just look at the condition. Look what we have done. Look
Mm-hmm.
at these endless imperial wars. Look at
Mm-hmm.
the lack of value for human life. Look at the decadence and the corruption that is ruling not only us, but tyrannizing the entire world, exactly as the British Empire was doing.
Well, it's so painful, and you're so right about that. And so I have been questioning lately as I've been learning about all of this stuff about the ways that the constitutional freedoms were very quickly undermined
Yeah.
by all of this rule by banks and everything, and obviously slavery and everything.
Yeah.
And I just started thinking about like what was the significance of like did we succeed in creating anything different than Great Britain, than England? Was some, I mean, I something, we do have an independent name. It sounds like we're an independent country. I guess I started wondering, like, was an independent country even created, or have we just been all along just this, arm of the British Empire that continues? Maybe, I mean, anyways, there is, it's sad.
It's
Yeah.
it's a good question. I mean, I don't think it's a simple black and white answer. I think it's yes and no. I think it's both. At
Mhm.
some level, we are independent. We have at least we can take ownership of our culture, the way that we have innovated language and art and music and lifestyle and a lot of things that are
Mhm.
genuinely American, we can claim and be very proud of. And that is independent for sure. At the same time, economically speaking, you bring up a very good point. I mean, that you could definitely argue that no, we've never really been free. And
Yeah, well, so this is what I'm starting to wonder about with just learning what I've been learning down that state national rabbit hole.
mhm,
So, talking about how, we've been in the Pluto in Capricorn return of
yeah,
the Declaration of Independence, and and Pluto into Aquarius being the Pluto return of the Constitution. I'm very interested to see what that has to do with, because it seems to me like, for example, the undecidedness of the election in
mhm,
November
mhm,
could result in a constitutional crisis.
yeah,
I've heard some people talking about the possibility of a contingent election, which has never happened before, and which
yeah,
the Constitution really is not all that clear about. And so that could be a big crisis. And of course, just the fact that constitutional freedoms have been trampled to such a remarkable degree with all the surveillance, with all the censorship, with
yeah,
the taxation. I mean, it really is like living under Mad King George, because the taxation is like crazy. Um, and anyways,
yeah,
I'm just curious to see, like, I feel like part of, like the state nationals movement is this awareness that started growing during the pandemic about the, what it means to be a US citizen.
yeah,
And I always thought it was supposed to mean that I'm protected under the Constitution. And I find out that as of 1871 and some more laws in the 1930s, it actually means that I'm considered a voluntary employee of a corporation headquartered in Washington, D.C., and therefore subject to taxation by a private corporation. The IRS is a private corporation headquartered in Puerto Rico. And and I'm the beneficiary of a trust,
Yeah.
which has to do with the Federal Reserve. And the benefit that I get is I get to spend this money. Anyways, it's like, that's not actually money. That's just, well, I mean, it's not gold or silver, it's promissory notes. And the whole promissory note system, and anyways, that's a whole tangled web. But
Yeah.
it's just interesting to me because they're like, for example, I heard that before 2020, before the pandemic and more people getting interested in this, there were like 40,000 people with state national status, which means you say, I'm a citizen of Pennsylvania, not I'm a citizen of the United States.
Yeah.
And those 40,000 people, pretty much all of them were members of the Bar Association and included plenty of politicians and plenty of people who know, anyways. And now there's millions of people changing to this status. So
Yeah.
I find that fascinating.
I think it's a really great sign of actual rebellion that's quite righteous and just, because one of the things that I've always loved about our revolution is that they tried many things, including diplomacy and economic work like boycotts, and a lot of deep philosophical work, great ideas, beautiful conversations, a lot of metaphysical and logical, rational help, a beautiful blend of all of the things that were available before it became a bloody war. And I think that is very virtuous because it's very different than what happened subsequently in France, which I'm not saying the French people didn't have something to rebel against, but the reign of terror, the things that went down in France were really dark and very
Yeah.
ugly. And it's hard to get behind what they did to many, many people that had committed no crime against them, that really, truly didn't need to be punished and humiliated and murdered in such a manner. It's not noble to just explode into a demonic rage and start killing everything in sight. And that's not what the American Revolution was. And so I do feel like this very, diplomatic and legal manner of rebelling is totally American. It's the first act long before anything has to get violent, and hopefully never, because that's not just, it's not wise, and it's really not very strategic to start terrorizing and committing violence when it's not necessary. Like, actually just reclaiming your sovereignty, it's philosophically and spiritually healthy. And
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm fascinated to keep talking about the archetypal dimensions of this, obviously. And I guess also I'm curious, just maybe to put it in a kind of brass tacks situation. Okay, sorry, I hear, oh, my husband's calling me. Talk to you later. Anyways, talking about, do you, like, the part of me, so I heard astrologers talking about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2019, anticipating it in 2020 and what a big deal it was going to be. And then when it happened, boy, it sure was a big deal. Life sucked for like a year there. It was really awful.
Yeah.
And anyways, the pandemic was a whole big revelation unto itself for me. But what I'm curious about is, do you anticipate there being sort of brass tacks disruptions to daily life, similar to what we experienced during the pandemic, in terms of some possibilities that I've thought about have been some kind of tactical interruptions to the electric and water grid, whether by our own government or by some foreign government. Just there being somehow, probably definitely there's going to be continued inflation, and what that would be like, or the total fall of the U.S. dollar, some sort of switch over to cryptocurrency. I guess, yeah, I'm curious about what what do you sense as possibilities for those kinds of impacts?
Uh, yes, I mean, all of those things will be tried because we are dealing with tyrants that are losing power. And that's the thing that is kind of a double-edged sword, because at one level it's frightening because that's when people are most dangerous. At the other level, they're losing their grip. And so what happened in 2020, Saturn and Pluto, I would honestly say that that was a real like final stand for what we'll just call neoliberal globalist politics.
Hmm.
And they do absolutely have a lot of power. Okay. They absolutely do. But at the same time, their dream is something that actually represents more what was born during Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. Number
Hmm.
one, I mean, you can thread back farther than this, but we could just start with 51, 52, and then go to the next cycle that started in 89, which is actually what is completing right now. So I'll explain that more in just a second. But Saturn and Pluto conjunctions, those happened approximately every 35 years. And the one that happened before was between Saturn and Pluto in Libra. And that was shortly followed by Pluto entering Scorpio. You know, that's when we were born. And it's interesting because those times are always associated with the rise of the worst kinds of evil, just tyranny and corruption and plague and the abuse of power. Most especially because Saturn and Pluto in Libra, we have exalted Saturn, and then Pluto enters Scorpio, so it kind of unleashed a lot of darkness, including the AIDS epidemic and all of that,
Hmm.
which, by the way, Anthony Fauci was involved in also. So we see him pop up
Hmm.
again in 2020 at the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, a place where Saturn is very, very strong. And so the combination of Saturn in his exaltation in Libra and then his very strong place in Capricorn combined with Pluto, tyrants have the upper hand. Unfortunately, that's just how it goes. And that's what we experienced. Total abuse and fear mongering and sickness of the mind. Just a total curse upon
Hmm.
the land. And that's Saturn and Pluto. But what we're actually seeing dissolving is associated more with what was born. We can go back to 1951, 52, and 53. So Saturn also conjoins Neptune. And that cycle is just like a moon cycle. It has the new moon, which is the conjunction, and then it has a waxing square, and then it has an opposition where it comes into full bloom, and then it has a waning square where it reveals what's just going to wither and die. Like, it's not going to bring everything forward. If anything, you know, maybe everything will die. But certainly by the waning square, you see what's just not going to make it by the time it
Hmm.
comes back around to the new conjunction.
And we have a Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries coming up in
That's right.
2025. Is that?
Exactly. So when we look at just next year, and certainly by 2026, when Uranus is in Gemini and Saturn and Neptune have conjoined at 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees of Aries, Saturn Neptune, this has like never happened before. There have been Saturn Neptune conjunctions in Aries, but never at 0 degrees.
Hmm.
0 degrees Aries is the beginning of the zodiac. It is the alpha and omega. It's the absolute beginning of a new era, new cycle, new vision, new paradigm.
Hmm.
And Saturn and Neptune, it's not entirely benevolent. Okay, there's a very dark side to it for sure. However, what it represents as well is some dreams coming to fruition, some dreams being materialized to be tested out for their strength. And so when we say something stands the test of time, a cultural tradition, an idea, we are really saying that this has endured so many dissolving
Hmm.
squares and tremendously difficult, destructive cycles, and yet it remains. there are things that are so true and so valuable that these cycles of time can do nothing to them except maybe rejuvenate them, reshape them for another era. But there are ideas that are weak, fragile, and delusional, and they are stripped down and dissolved, and they are just taken away with the tide. So we can look at the United States and see 1952, 1953. That is when Saturn and Neptune conjoined in Libra. And it was at this time, specifically 1953 was when the Korean War ended. That's when North Korea rose. The North Korea that we know and fear today is the result of that war ending in 53. There was a lot of things going on in 53 that show the United States changing its meaning and its purpose in the world. Not so unconsciously, more directly, but very unconsciously for most of the people, because this is right after, it's not right after, but it's still shortly after World War II has been won. The narrative for the greatest generation was that we were heroes. We were the greatest country on earth, and we were rich and prosperous, and we were the good guys. And it was a beautiful story. And beautiful stories are important for the human psyche. They hold people together. That's the difference between a World War II veteran and a Vietnam veteran. It's not that the combat was any different or any less bad. Vietnam was horrible, and so was World War II. But the story that was given to a World War II veteran when they come home was beautiful and edifying, and they were loved and supported, and they were told that what they did was meaningful and purposeful, and that it was heroic. Vietnam veterans, just one generation later, the complete opposite. They're like spit on by their fellow citizens, and nobody's giving them any reason that they can actually find a center with as to why they just did that and what was the point of it. Not only that, but mass media had expanded to such a point, accelerated to such an extent that now they're seeing things that were never seen before, real-time footage of the atrocities. And also there's people doing journalism on the fact that it was also about, or I guess completely about, the heroin trade and other horrific things that are just taking the American spirit down. And so these poor veterans are going insane because they don't know why the hell they did this. But really, this all started in 1952-53. So Saturn conjoined Neptune in Libra. And that was the time where we had won the Korean War. But it's very different. You notice, like, it's not quite like World War II. It doesn't feel the same. It's not like as heroic, but they're like still coming down off World War II. So it's a good enough story. We're stopping communism. Okay. Elvis went. Okay. All right. Stalin died at this time. So the whole shape or the face of the enemy, by the way, Stalin was our ally in World War II until the final 11th hour. But Stalin dies at this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, changing the face of the enemy. USSR is now a completely different creature. Korean War, now we have North Korea. We have also the first color television broadcast. So mass media is accelerating. We got the polio vaccine. We have the birth of U.S. imperialism as we kind of know it today. And they didn't call it globalism back then. It was something else. It was the idea that the United States is going to police the entire world and cleanse the earth of communism. and this was accepted for a little while, not very long. But the reason why, it was challenged at the first waxing square of Saturn and Neptune, which happened in 1963. So what was born ideologically, Saturn, Neptune, and Libra, it's a delusional fantasy of diplomacy around the world that's hiding a lot of brutality and violence. But really, it's just, we have the best ideas, we're the greatest diplomats, we're the most fair, we're the most just, very high sense of self as a nation. And then by the first waxing square, 1963, that's the year that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And it wasn't exactly on the day of the square. It was many months later, I think 4 or 5 months later, But nevertheless, what was going on at the square is he found out that the CIA was lying to him and trying to get him to enter the war in Vietnam, which he absolutely refused to do. He stood up against them and said, no, that is not what America is doing. That's not right. Because he came from an old world idea of what our country should be doing, and actually had, or at least thought he had, the power to say no to something that he really thought was unstrategic, unjust, unethical, and also it's what the American people wanted. They didn't want to go to Vietnam. Nobody did. So he was representing the people like he was supposed to. They killed him, and
Right.
immediately we entered the war. Like, immediately. They just swore Nixon in, and we're in the war. Boom. And
I feel like it was a total CIA coup. I mean, because they also killed RFK
yeah.
and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Oh
my God. Yeah, like Oliver Stone's done some really great research, created an amazing documentary on that assassination, JFK assassination. Obviously, he also directed the film and all that, but like his documentary is really great, very thorough, and it's accessible for all. So if you don't want to read a whole bunch of heavy books, you can actually just watch this great documentary.
The Oliver Stone's JFK, and the documentary with it, that was fully persuasive for me. I was like, well, oh, so that's what happened.
But see how this really matters to look at the development of something. Like, number one, Saturn-Neptune conjunct 1953. Our government, at least some element of it, thinks, all right, this is us now. We're just going to win every war against communism and conquer the world, like Great Britain. And also, first color television broadcast. First waxing square, someone stands up to them, says, no, we're not doing that. And they kill him on national television in full color to traumatize the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
That collective trauma of seeing the president be blown to bits on national television is something that, I mean, my father and my mother were traumatized by that. Certainly my grandparents. It was a truly devastating moment. People were not prepared to witness something like that and process something like that. Now, the story has been that the official narrative that was spit out, which was really lame, was believed by everybody. This is not true, and that's something I really want to stand up for Americans about.
But that's where they coined the term conspiracy theory, right? Because so many people were talking about the CIA doing it, they were like, we need to discredit this.
They had, they had a lot of theories, and some of them were pretty damn spot on, and some of them may have been wild, but the fact is that people questioned that. They didn't just swallow it. That's a lie. That's a part of the narrative that's meant to keep us down. Always being told that you're dumb, docile, and that you've always been this way. Like, it's not true. If you ask anybody who actually was there, you will hear that it was shocking. Everybody's went in shock. Nobody knows what the fuck's going on. But as soon as things started to settle, a little dust settles, a lot of people ask questions. It didn't make much sense. They really wanted to know, what the hell is that? Then we enter the war. What the hell is that? People knew that it was suspicious, but they didn't have access to information the way we do now. So what can you do? You can't prove anything. So the next beat in this story is 1971 and 72. This is when we went off the gold standard, bringing it back to what you were talking about. This is when Nixon is like, okay, there's no more gold backing our money. We're just playing with air. And we are also experiencing during this time, during that opposition, a period of, we're in the middle of Vietnam still, by the way. There's such a sense of nihilism. There's, I know, an economic recession that I've heard about. You know, my parents have told me that people were in gas lines and things were just like really bad during this time. Something's dissolving and getting drained in this country, and people don't actually feel connected to the narrative that we are supposed to be held together by anymore. It just completely collapses. At this time, 71, 72, there's some beautiful stuff going on, like in dance music, there's really great culture going on. But in terms of these political ideologies, they're really revealing what's coming into bloom is so ugly and so dark and so unhealthy. And there is a genuine like revulsion in the culture as a
Mm-hmm.
result. Most young people at this point, they're not pro-military. They don't want to go to this war. They don't want to be a part of the establishment. There's a real anti-establishment sentiment that's been rising since the Vietnam War began. Then we have the waning square, and this happens in 79 and 80. And this is a time where we have like this sense that the new decade, the 80s is going to be so awesome. It's going to be something that we can really like actually get behind. The 80s has all this potential to be a totally different world. And it's going to be like the full bloom of basically the anti-establishment
Mm.
sentiment. The counterculture is going to really like win.
Mm.
And you can see the style just kind of like, if you see American Gigolo, that film, it came out in 1980. It's like a
Mm.
perfect cusp film. It's like the 70s, but like encapsulated in this perfect crystallized ideal platonic form. It's like the platonic form of the 70s. And it was made in 1980, and you could tell that like there's this sense that the world's going to look and feel like this. And it still has a lot of 1950s mores and a lot of 1950s manners, to be honest. But it's also like it's more liberated and cool. And the world doesn't look anything like this in the 80s. It's just like completely not the case at all, because this square is waning. And so things just start dissolving. And what rises is what the ultimate intention at 1952-53 was, which is global corporations and this imperialism that's taken on a new form. It's not necessarily militaries invading your country, though there's plenty of that. But in terms of the first world, and that's where we get these ideas too of the first world, second world, third world. First world nations are invaded by corporations, and they are getting more and more and more power, more and more and more influence. And so what happens in our time, this next cycle, which is now falling apart, it's dissolving, started in 1989. So it's related to things that began in 52, 53. Sure, it absolutely is. It's building on. But 1989 is Reagan, the fall of the Berlin Wall. It is like the neoliberal globalist ideology is fully formed, and it is being loudly proclaimed like a
Mhm.
religion. And it is religious. It's a religious zeitgeist because it's Saturn and Neptune. It's the
And what
real
was the
world and dreams.
what was the conjunction in 1989? What sign was that?
Capricorn, of course,
Okay.
Capricorn. So that's why it got so materialized in the world and
Mhm.
so easily expressed in the world of power. So politics and institutions, and of course corporations, which are Capricornian institutions, these things become the symbol of might and power in the world. And that whole paradigm of the end of history, you know, Fukuyama's essay, The End of History, was actually published in 1989. He was working for the State Department, by the way. He wasn't just some college professor. So he's a propagandist, and he writes this essay that was about how we had literally solved every problem in global politics, so long as we represent, without fail, the values of the neoliberal agenda, which means that we are the most imperial people that have ever walked the earth, because everyone has to swallow our ideology and the way we see things, and everyone has to live as we tell them to live. And everyone will like it because it's prosperous and fun. And this is what he called the end of history. And he doesn't mean that like there's no more events. He just means there's not going to be any more problems. No more problems. We have liberal democracies that live up to this ideal. Political organization has been solved. We have the absolute best ideas, and there's nothing else that will ever arise to ever even compete with this new way. And so,
That is a very intense, bizarre delusion, isn't
and
it?
it was
It's just like,
exactly. This is the paradigm that we are living under right now. Our leaders
Mm.
in Washington, all of them believe this. Truly, like without
You,
getting into any other realm, which they believe a lot of crazy stuff, but this is what they believe on record. Like they are very
mm,
proud of this ideology. This is their
hmm.
religion. And there are darker aspects to it, of course, because this is nonsense. Like, this is imperialism at its core. This is our religion, and you're going to swallow it. And there's really no room for your culture or your history or your sensibilities or your values or your ideas. Fuck you. Do what we say. That's what this is. And so the state, just like in communism, is God. But it's a much more, it's a fancy dress god, I guess. Like I guess it has designer clothes and a Rolex or something instead of a fedora. But it's the same thing. It's the
Hmm.
state is God, and we've solved all the problems of communism. So this is neo-con liberal democracy, all the same thing. There's no
Hmm.
division between left and right here. This is just an unsurpassable ideal. And it was born in 89, and it was symbolized by the fall of the Berlin Wall. And again, I'm not saying that that wasn't something that needed to happen. I know the people of Germany, Berlin was suffering a lot, but like it's still symbolized and was used as a tool of propaganda to symbolize the dissolution, Neptune, of somebody else's regime and the rise of our ideal. So we can look at the square, waxing square of this time, and that was in 1998, 1999, and a lot went down, so many things, but this is the Y2K era. This is when Google first was incorporated. So Google was incorporated in 98, right at the Saturn-Neptune square waxing. Um, there was, 89 is when the World Wide Web was actually first released on open
Mm.
source. So the World Wide Web begins with the Berlin Wall falling, neoliberalism, global surveillance state really building its presence, and that requires the internet to become public. So 1998, first square, we have Google, we have the sense that like we're at the end of history, 1999, Y2K. Why did people say all of that stuff? Why were people looking for a great disaster at the turn of the century? It was because we were inculcated with and indoctrinated with the end of history ideology,
Hmm.
whether we knew it or not.
Hmm.
And that is millenarianism. It's pretty common, but it was a specific kind of religious zeitgeist. Very different than the apocalypse, but nevertheless, a similar kind of thing. And so by the time we get to 99, we have, the Matrix, very important film. It seems to really encapsulate this Saturn Neptune square. The real sense that people have that maybe this is not enough for life to be meaningful.
Hmm.
Just money that's not even real. Money's not even real. Our whole religion is based on money, and it's not even real. We fully acknowledge it's not real, and the state is God. It just felt wrong, and people knew it. So something like The Matrix comes out and really speaks to people because there is that crisis going on in the collective psyche. We also have GMOs. 1989 conjunction, GMOs are like publicly accepted, they're legalized.
Hmm.
1998, 1999, the first studies that prove that they are toxic, cancer causing, and completely unfit for any animal or human consumption come out. Very important papers. It doesn't mean they stop using them, but the square
Right.
was tension, like no. And just like
Hmm.
Kennedy said, no, they ignored these papers and have gone
Hmm.
on to continue. Opposition, 2006, 2007, deep into the Bush era. And deep into the Iraq War. Invaded Afghanistan at this point. Why? Nobody knew. And people did seem to care. There was some protest.
Apparently, for the massive to stop the Taliban from stopping opium production. I recently learned about
Heroin
this.
again, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
because the opiate epidemic in America directly followed our invasion of Afghanistan. We liberated Afghanistan from the Taliban so we could have our opium production.
yeah,
Once I
100%.
learned that, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and this is like 2006, 2007. The opposition is also when we have the first iPhone comes out in June of 2007, and I think it was exactly on the date of the Saturn-Neptune opposition. By the way, Saturn was in Leo, the sign of self-obsession, and
Mm,
Neptune was in Aquarius, technology that's dreamy and dissolved. So here we
mm.
have the first opportunity for the solipsism and narcissism that we all know and love today, which is just constantly taking pictures of yourself and thinking that the whole world wants to see you eating dinner. Like Saturn Neptune opposition. But believe me, people do use astrology to time these things. And I am positive that this was one of those times because it was exact. Like they released the iPhones, the very first one, on the date of the last Saturn Neptune opposition in those signs. And then 6 months later, it was released in England. So it was like they did that in America first. And then we have Pluto entering into Capricorn 2008, January 2008. New era, not related to Saturn Neptune, but still. In between all of this, we're looking at something really big shifts. And in 2007, we also have some more complaints, more analysis, more studies published on Monsanto and the GMOs and how awful they are. Liver, kidney, and heart damage. Glyphosates, absolutely wrecking the immune system. And yet,
Mm,
they continue to feed people this. We
mm,
have the closing square of this neoliberal end of history religious zeitgeist happening in 2015 and 2016. And this is why it pertains to the election, because this was when Donald Trump was elected. And people in this paradigm, Hillary Clinton being included, most definitely Obama, people who believed in the end of history and the neoliberal agenda, that this is what we're going to spread across the world. And we're going to call it tolerance and diversity, even though it's actually just gross imperialism, shoving our ideas down other people's throats by force if necessary, killing anybody in sight just because we are that dedicated to forcing our opinion, forcing our agenda. We don't care if it represents the American people's will. That doesn't matter anymore. Fuck you. We're going to do what we want. But they did not anticipate, and this is what I really think is funny, they didn't anticipate that they could lose any of this power because they
mm,
saw it through the lens of a religious fanatic, which they never see their own weaknesses. They're like
mm,
always convinced of their
mm.
righteousness and they're always convinced of their power. And bullies are this way as well. And so they've been setting things up for so long and getting away with it, literally getting away with mass murder, mass slaughter. They're all war criminals. None of them have been tried for murder or war crimes. They're just going at it without retribution. And so I really do believe they thought Hillary Clinton was going to win because she is a high priestess of this. This is what she believes. And she thinks she's a very good person because she thinks these things are good. And she doesn't care about human life. You know, that's not on her mind. It doesn't matter to her. And so when we have Donald Trump showing up, it's the waning square, meaning that this initial seed starts withering. It starts revealing its weaknesses. And he struck while the iron was hot. Boom. Like it was just like they didn't see
That
that
was
coming.
so intense. That was such an intense, trippy shift when Donald Trump
Mhm.
became president. It was wild.
It was
Yeah.
super wild, and people didn't see that coming because the religious zeitgeist was blinding. Perceptual distortion distorts your perception of reality. And so it was just a big joke to them and not a threat. They didn't think that there was any competition for their position because that's the neoliberal end of history paradigm, is that there is no competition. This is the best idea that's ever been thought. And there will never be a smarter or more insightful or more idealistic ideology that will ever arrive on this earth. Like, it's the most arrogant and ridiculous example of hubris in all of history. It blows
That's one
Titanic
of the
out of the
things
water.
that I find so adorable about liberals these days is, they passionately hate Donald Trump and Donald Trump's obvious narcissism. And they're like completely so deeply blind to their rabid narcissism. It's like, it's really funny. It's just,
I I know. And I've always thought, like, I'm fine. You can hate any politician, any president you want, but I've yet to find someone who wants to actually have a real conversation, critique him for things he's done. Don't just say these things that you've heard. Don't be an echo chamber of this nonsense, because when I hear people saying they're afraid of Donald Trump, I'm like, why? We
Why
have
have you
been
been reading the New York Times? So my first thought is like, are you reading the New York Times and the Washington Post, and why are you doing that? And I was first, my mind was first opened to Donald Trump as possibly like not complete evil by listening to John Michael Greer, who's a very deep Golden Dawn practitioner.
I love him.
Um,
I've talked to him before. I've actually interviewed him. He's
Yeah.
amazing.
Oh, so cool. He's so amazing. I love John Michael Greer, and he has a wonderful book called The King in Orange, which is all about the
Mm.
like magic surrounding the 2016 election. And anyways, I listened to an interview with him where he pointed out all the ways that somebody asked him who he was voting for, and he was like, "Well, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump because whatever else he is, he's not a crazy globalist," and like laid out the case for Trump being an alternative to the globalist nightmare. And I was like, huh, fascinating. I literally never heard anybody in any mainstream news actually talk about Donald Trump's challenge to the liberal globalist agenda. And obviously, anyways, he's still a
It's
billionaire. He's
yes,
got his own things.
yes, it's true. And I love critiquing people in power. I think that's our job. It's our right. And it's what journalists are supposed to do. And the lack of integrity that we have seen in our journalists has been one of the reasons why he continues to gain popularity and power, because there is such an alienation that people feel from this establishment, because this permanent political establishment, which we will just describe as neoliberal, globalist, end of history, religious fanatics, they have become completely and totally divorced from the needs of anybody they're supposed to be representing. That's not even on their mind anymore. It's completely tyrannical and corrupt. And so the more that they make a monster out of Donald Trump, the more that people will love him. And for some reason, they can't understand that. I was always like, all they have to do is give him a hug, make it look like they're friends, and his constituency is gone. It's evaporated. But they continue to play this game where they give him more and more and more power and popularity, because we all of us feel alienated and ignored and abused. And so when somebody represents that in the theatrical political world, it's going to be popular and it's going to get more and more popular. And to me, all I want is for people to have a fair conversation with me about why they hate Donald Trump, because I do want to talk about that. However, he has been blamed for the things like monsters do, always. Monsters are there to project your shadow onto. That's what the purpose of them is. They serve that function. And to me, I'm like, what are you afraid of? We have been ruled by war criminals who have been murdering innocent children and women and people who have never done us harm or even threatened us, not even ideologically threatened us,
Mm-hmm.
ever in our lives. And it's been done in our name and with our tax dollars, and it goes on and on and on our entire lives. We have been ruled by tyrants that have no regard for human life and hate us too. So what are you afraid of?
Like, what are you? What are you? I know, big orange man, bad. I know it's
I
fascinating though. Because I was in that state. Like, I kind of understand it because like I was really gripped by that. Like the first couple years of Donald Trump's presidency, I was still a card carrying liberal, and I was reading the New York Times every morning to learn about
oh,
the transgressions of the big bad orange man. And,
yeah.
it wasn't until the middle of the pandemic and the New York Times started saying like ludicrous things like, if you leave your house, you're a white supremacist. And just like really strange things. I started being like, wait, I think I don't agree with these people. Let me think other thoughts.
Yeah.
But But it was there's a spell. There's like a very thick, heavy spell. Well, so take us home though, Rachel. Tell us about the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries. I mean, does that we were talking about the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Capricorn with
Yeah.
1989 being all about that power, and I guess I'm wondering, does the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries really say war, like Aries war?
Yeah, I mean, it does. That's the truth. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the war that we imagine with planes and bombs and machine guns.
Well, the
It
psyops war is already so intense, the information psychological warfare.
exactly. Well, let's just do a quick summary of election day, and then we'll talk about what's coming up. So here's what's
Okay.
happening. So Pluto entered Aquarius this year, and it was a big shift. It's the first time that we've had, well, last year we had a quick little preview, but Pluto entered Aquarius, and we were like, wow, a new Plutonian energy. Wow, Pluto in Aquarius, a new age, but not really. This year's a bridge because Pluto is, in fact, moving back into Capricorn for one last stand. It's literally the final boss. And yeah, final boss. Pluto moves back into Capricorn on September 2nd, September 1st, September 2nd, depending on where you are. And so on election day, we also have Mars in Cancer, which is debilitated Mars, and that's dangerous, especially during very dangerous times. And on November 3rd, November 4th, again, depending on where you are, the day before the election, we have Mars at 29 degrees of Cancer opposing Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn. So the US is actually having the final showdown of its Pluto return with a Mars opposition triggering something super intense right before the election. Then Mars is going to move into Leo, and I suspect that election day, it will not be smooth. There will actually be literal violence, and it's going to be ugly because Mars in Cancer is like the rage of a mother bear who has had their cub disturbed, plus Pluto in Capricorn agitating that. So the shadow of the nation. We're going to have people projecting so much hate and becoming ferocious, and it's dangerous. So I really recommend not going to protests or going to large crowds. And I hate to say that because it's your right to do it. And if you feel called, do it. But understand that it is a very dangerous day to be in a crowd. Not only that, but then we have Mars stationing retrograde in the sign of Leo on December 6th. So we have the election, it is FUBAR, and then we have Mars going retrograde. So let's just say, and I doubt it, but it's possible that they'll announce a winner.
Mhm.
Everyone knows Donald Trump's going to win, but we don't know if he'll become president. I mean, that's the thing. It's just whether you hate him or love him, he is going to win so long as there's an election that actually counts votes. But we don't know what the hell's going to happen because this is a very, very dark time. And these are a lot of desperate people that want to maintain the end of history. They really want that to go on forever. And it's not. And so they're desperate and they're going to do everything that they can to keep it going. And so who knows what's going to happen, what's going to be announced. But definitely by the time Mars stations retrograde, another battle begins. And it's not going to be resolved until like February. But what we do see is on Inauguration Day, the sun, first of all, every Inauguration Day in the United States is elected as well. The sun enters Aquarius on that day and is always conjunct the midheaven in Washington, D.C., because the ritual is at noon. And normally that's the ideal of Aquarian values being inaugurated. But here we have the sun conjunct Pluto, because Pluto will move into Aquarius again on November 19th and be there to capture the sun's energy on Inauguration Day. So what that says is whoever becomes president, that office and this country will never be the same. And it really hasn't been for a long time, but this is going to be like the death of the way things were. It could be a wonderful thing, but I don't know because I cannot predict all of the twists and turns and variables. There are so many things that are just impossible to understand. We know that it's very, very, very dark, chaotic, and very dramatic. So there will be war. Next, major Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the 0 point of Aries has some good in it, which is that there will be ideals of individual sovereignty. There will be a rebellious spirit that I think is actually very important, because to be submissive and subdued in the face of forces like these is inhuman. We must not actually accept rulers that are this incompetent, sick, and murderous. It doesn't reflect us and it doesn't represent us, and we have the right to actually say so. So I do see the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries having a lot of good in it. A rebellious spirit, personal individuality and sovereignty and freedom, and a lot of things that actually matter developing and becoming really powerful. A new zeitgeist, a new paradigm, a new egregor, if you will. But
Yeah.
war, yeah, because when something like that is born, it's anathema to whatever is there to conflict
Do
with
you
that and oppose that. So yeah.
Yes. Do you see that manifesting as some sort of like national divorce slash civil war state succession thing? Or do you see that manifesting more as in connection to like, I don't know, I guess I keep thinking about the tensions between Israel and Iran and
Yeah.
China and Taiwan, it's Russia and
Um,
Ukraine. It seems like there's the possibility for something, a world war type.
I think it's better for us to just recognize that World War III has already started.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you just look at it, it's already begun. It's true that the US hasn't officially entered, like the story hasn't begun yet, but we're in the preamble and it's already begun, and we're involved. In fact, we're at fault for everything that's happened in Ukraine, and we're also at fault for what's going on in Israel and Palestine. So anything that is going on right now at that level is completely and totally permitted and also desired by the Biden administration. And so I think 450,000 dead Ukrainian men, because there has been no intervention or diplomacy that could have been easily performed at any time. And I don't want to look at the statistics in Palestine anymore. The last time I saw it, it was like 40,000 women and children. I can't even look at it. It's so fucking horrible. So World War III has begun and it will continue. But in terms of like what's happening here, I
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of the Saturn, Neptune, and Aries stuff being exactly what you were describing. The return to sovereignty, even within the states, because state governments, particularly in a place like California, where I'm from,
Oh Lord, yeah.
so tyrannical. Like, I didn't even vote for Obama because I've been in California my whole life, and I could no longer believe in stuff like that by the time Obama ran. And I was in my early 20s. I was in college. I should have been there, but I couldn't, because this place has been completely overtaken by evil corporate interests and absolute abject inhuman politics. And I'm not talking about gay rights and stuff, guys. Of course I'm all of that, but no, like, I've learned for a long time that liberal is a Trojan horse for a lot of evil and a lot of truly despotic and tyrannical things. And it breaks my heart because I'm actually I'm very liberal. But I can't say that now because that word doesn't mean what I am at all
Right. It
anymore.
doesn't mean connection to like desiring freedom for oneself and others, and it doesn't
I'm
mean
a
anything like
Yeah,
that.
I'm against war. I'm sorry, I won't stand for it. And that's what happened. Like, I went to, I went to university in San Fernando Valley, and I was naive. I was living in my own little world. And I remember I showed up and it was like after one horrible drone strike that Obama had authorized. And I was really upset. And I said something about it in class, legitimately believing I'm here with old heads that believe in freedom and human rights. Like, that's what college professors represented to me. And that's what I thought we were there to talk about. And we were always criticizing US imperialism and stuff, at least at some level. And so when I said something critical, all I did was speak about this drone strike and how much I had like nothing but disrespect and disgust for the Obama administration. I was actually like I was ostracized and also, like, I think kind of like socially abused for speaking out
Mm.
against Obama. And I had no idea that was going to happen. I was shocked because I'm like, but he's a war criminal. Like, what are you guys saying? And then I found out, like, it's cool to hate Bush for being a war criminal, but Obama's wars are cool. And that's where I just had my complete meltdown. I'm like, I'm not going to do this. No fucking way. It's really easy to just say no to mass murder, slaughter of innocents, and raping and pillaging other people. It's really easy. It's not hard. But I
Mm-hmm.
learned that day, like, the spell is so strong. You can make people who were protesting the same war under one administration be like, okay with it, and actually defend it 2 years later.
Oh, it's
So that's
so
how
deep.
I found that.
Yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
learned that lesson earlier than me, Rachel. I didn't start to, I mean, I had a whole series of weird, intense experiences at Occupy Pittsburgh. And when there was, even before that, when there was the globalist, the G20 was in Pittsburgh in,
Yeah.
I forget when it was that 2009? Anyways,
Yeah.
beginning to like come to like greater consciousness about this. But even so, I don't know, like I remember like again in the early days of the pandemic, I thought I was friends with anarchists, like again, because people I knew from Occupy Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
These anarchists, when it was announced that there was a like a curfew and that you couldn't cross state lines without special permission, I suddenly saw a flurry of people like it was a self-identified anarchist queer doula person was posting in like rapturous excitement about how she was going to report her father to the state because he was crossing state lines without permission. And I just like I don't know, it was just so I started realizing like the depths to which people to which we are all subject to, I guess, very, very vulnerable to weird hypnosis and desire. Anyways, I, in some ways, I've become very cynical since then because it's hard for me. Like, I have to have an in depth conversation with somebody and see that they really understand the whole arc of history before I will trust that
Yeah.
they understand the political situation the way that I do. I can't accept these labels anymore. When somebody says I'm an anarchist, I'm a liberal, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay. And what does
Right.
that mean to you?
Right. And in fact, when somebody's obsessed with their identity with those labels, it's a clear sign that they're not actually uh, very deep or very thoughtful about any of those things, because identitarian politics is a part of the state being God. This is how people are viewed through that lens of bureaucracy as a statistic and nothing more, which is debasing, dehumanizing, and completely untrue. It's not even true. Nobody can be
So,
represented by stats, but it's very important for these mechanistic minds at the top of this technocratic, bureaucratic society to look at everyone through statistics. And so it's so much easier, and it's also better for them, not us. It's better for machines, not us, to have a simple label that sums you up, reduces you down to something that is completely untrue. And not only that, but it's also a replacement for religion, which is very sad because it's a
what a,
religion of the
yeah,
state. It's the
it's a
state's religion.
lame, it's so lame. It's such a lame
Yeah.
replacement. Well,
And
Rachel,
then,
this has
yeah.
been such a joy talking with you about this today and hearing your insights. And again, I feel like I'm seeing this vast kaleidoscopic perspective that I hadn't been seeing before. And I know that all of my listeners are going to be grateful for that too. And it's just so wonderful getting to hear about this from you. Thank you so much for coming on to join us today.
You're welcome. My pleasure. So nice to be
And
able to talk.
yes, indeed. And where can people get more connected with you or tell us about your offerings or what you have going on?
Well, I am right now focusing almost exclusively on my Patreon community, and that is patreon.com/Aeolian Heart. And the reason why I've been just so digging the Patreon thing is because throughout the pandemic and beyond, this entire time that things got really heavy, I just started writing these weekly forecasts and also recording voicemails every single week. And for whatever reason, it was easier for me and also way deeper and more intimate for me to just speak to this like smaller community instead of
Mm.
trying to reach the wide world. I really went like deep within. There's a lot of reasons for that, mostly astrological. But Patreon is the best possible way to stay in touch with me. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, and I am in touch on there. But every week on Patreon, I send out a forecast, I send out a weekly voicemail, and I've added a couple of tiers recently because I am building an amazing community that I'm calling Oracle for the time being.
Mm.
But Oracle's going to be, I have a Discord server that I'm building. So we're going to have a community that is uncensored and not related to big tech. That's a big step for me because I'm not a tech person. So it's been hard to leave Facebook and shit, but I finally did it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, on there, you can get my classes. I have an amazing astrology class. I have an alchemy class. Those are accessible to people that join that community. I have not only the voicemails, but we're going to have live streams to talk about the upcoming astrology of every solar season. I'm going to be doing some webinars here and there for important events, certainly for the election, there'll be stuff. And I'm also going to be doing, for the upper tier masterminds, where we dig into natal chart reading techniques, offer support to one another, just have like a circle of like-minded astrology enthusiasts who want to really dig into interpretive work, different dimensions, different styles, and just create a really good dialogue that's not only supportive considering what's going on outside, but also supportive to people that just want to speak this language and struggle to find people to talk to about it. Because even for me in LA, it's hard to find people to talk astrology with if you want to go past a certain level. So that's what I'm
Indeed.
offering right now. It's the best possible way.
Indeed. Well, I'm so excited for that, and I hope that my listeners check it out, and I know that I will. And I know, anyways, I'm just grateful to you, Rachel, because I feel like you are truly a light in this hermetic renaissance that's blossoming in the United States. And I feel the way when I, get one of your emails or experience. I just feel the way that your insight is rippling out into the larger mind and the larger soul of the people who are spiritually alive in this country and around the world. And I'm delighted with that. Well, you ran with it, Rachel. I mean, you absolutely ran with it. I talked to so many people who do not do a damn thing that I suggest to them. So I love that you ran with it. It's my deep pleasure. My deep, deep pleasure. Thank you, dear. So all right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Sleepover podcast. So you can click like, you can subscribe, you can tell your friends, you can go to the Immortal College website and subscribe to our email list. Also, of course, check out aeolianheart.com and Rachel's Patreon. So that's patreon.com/aeolianheart. Okay, all right. You got it, everybody. Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording.